Requests have come for more videos about public domain stuff, and from that I have to appreciate having free material to research. Thank you. Welcome to my channel, KC, that's me, Carrie Chug the Sledge Storyteller, here to talk about the wonderful world of storytelling and to open up discussion about how we can tell the best stories we can. So, these near 200 videos I've posted have been dominated by superhero lore because I've always had a soft spot for that genre. But what about Kaiju? Around the time I was age 4, I had 3 favorite icons: Batman, Lone Ranger, and Godzilla. Mainly the 70s Godzilla cartoon from Hanna-Barbera, and 2 Christmases in a row I asked for the Godzilla toy that was part of the Shogun Warrior lineup and had no such luck. But I was about 6 when I finally saw Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I experienced only the 1976 version of King Kong until I was 17 when my parents finally hooked up cable and got to see the original 1933 movie. But yeah, I've always had a soft spot for Kaiju. Now, knowing that I'll make myself out as ignorant, I'll acknowledge the Japanese meaning of the word Kaiju. Google lookup for such is Japanese for Kai, meaning mystery, apparition, specter, or Ju, standing for beast. Now, that broad definition would make for a week-long video to cover all public domain characters that fit that criteria. So I'll go strictly by beings of abnormal size for their animal type. Lots of fun to have here. Now, comes as no surprise that Kaiju are mostly rooted in various animal groups. In fact, while this is about public domain Kaiju, no one can claim any species as an intellectual property. You can beef up any animal you want. You do have to be mindful not to copy an origin story of a kaiju owned by any publisher or studio, and have anything you create be legally distinct from the original. And now's as good a time as any to say watch Sci-Fi's Asylum movies to see how ineffective kaiju hybrids are. Now, along those lines, it's interesting how big the creative spectrum for kaiju has been. Apes and reptiles are at the forefront in our minds, and kaiju birds and bug kaiju are pretty common as well. The oldest examples are ancient mythological monsters, the Egyptian Sphinx, Greek monsters like Cyclops, Hydra, Nemean the Lion, Cerberus, and the Minotaur, dragons from all cultures like Tiamat, Quetzalcoatl, Tatsu, Basilisk, and Fafnir. These kaiju that follow don't date back to the 1920s, which make public domain automatic. Instead, in their case, they have that status because the owners did not get them renewed in copyright when they were supposed to. But now, the novel, not the movie, of King Kong is public domain, but as similar as those two are, I suggest you consult an IP lawyer about how you can navigate that IP minefield. As far as I've been able to figure out through research, the oldest public domain dragon movie is PRC's Flying Serpent, released in 1946. It has a simplistic use of the Quetzalcoatl myth from Aztec mythology. It is a weird B-movie where a guy wants to protect the ancient treasure cave he found and finds a way to direct the flying serpent at any rival treasure claimer with the serpent's feathers. Also in the late 50s, writer J. Simons observed the ferocious nature of the shrew on its scale and decided that it's worthy of scaling up for his novel Killer Shrews and his screenplay for the 1959 movie of that same name. Here, people living in a small island are terrorized by giant shrews who came forth because of, maybe you've heard this before, scientific research gone awry. Now, out of all the public domain kaiju movies, the best example of so bad it's good is easily Giant Gila Monster, at least to me. As lazily made as its title, I gather that the movie did have a decent reptile wrangler as well as the lizards seemed to move as needed. Miniatures are B movie grade, so, and the acting and singing
Children laugh.
Actually, that makes you wish they'd just get back to the acting. But that's public domain. Debuted a movie that's not public domain now, but from Charlton Comics. The comics themselves, public domain. Conga, who was not among the characters from Charlton Comics, picked up by other publishers, and so the copyright ran out on it. As the story goes, Conga was a monkey who went under a scientific experiment. Again, that premise, but by Professor Charles Decker, and thus became a chimp and later a gorilla. And there's a side effect in which Conga can read minds and will kill upon evil Professor Decker's command. Now, the whole thing goes out of Decker's control when Conga grows to King Kong dimensions and begins wreaking urban havoc. But the only difference between that and the outline from the comic and what went into the movie, using Batman movie Alfred Michael Goff as Professor Decker, is that they don't bother with Conga's monkey stage and start him off as a chimp. Now, shifting from animal kaiju to plant kaiju, any connoisseur of classic movie musicals would readily identify Howard Keel with Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Me, it's the War Wagon, but before either, he was in Day of the Triffids, 1963. A strange meteor shower blinds most of human population on Earth. In turn, a merchant naval officer faced with the task he has to eradicate tall, hostile plants that are eating people and animals. Basically, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel and could go a good hour from here to detail so many more. But again, you can build on any animal concept to come up with something entirely new, as well as make any of the aforementioned kaiju into something interesting. Different kind of storytelling, sometimes inspiring, readily available in public domain. Another look in the realm of kaiju. Once again, after deciding that it was worth exploring after a viewer suggested it. So to clarify, public domain here refers to media that has reached a status where no one can claim ownership over it, either due to reaching a certain age, which currently means anything that came out before 1928, or if the owner fails to renew copyright at the proper juncture. The latter applies here, as this movie, directed by Larry Buchanan, released in 1967, was never renewed when it should have been. And I better clarify, while I believe Zontar fits the bill for kaiju, the Japanese word for strange beast, not necessarily big beast, and he is larger than your average human, it's only fair to let YouTube channel Porsche Popnecker's thumbnail tell you just what the runtime would be for Zontar to appear on screen, and how crudely built the either costume or puppet, maybe it's both, is. But what's sad is that it's terribly constructed compared to what was used in the movie it was a remake of. It Conquered the World, brought to you by the king of B movies himself, Roger Corman.
As the plot goes, Zontar comes to Earth by hitching a ride on a satellite that a team of scientists sent out to probe Venus. The chief protagonist in scientist Dr. Kurt Taylor is played by John Agar, and supporting character Keith Ritchie is played by Tony Houston. And Keith, maybe you've heard this before, takes it upon himself to usher in Zontar, who promises to bring on a more peaceful way of life to the human race before it destroys itself. After his arrival to Earth, just what does Zontar do to accomplish this? He sends in some small flying creatures to swoop in, bite humans on the back of the neck, turning them into zombies.
Now, as I watch those creatures, I think it's a bird, it's a beetle, it's
Injectapod.
And while no one ever tries to remove the spur left in the neck to see if it would turn them back to normal, we're supposed to readily accept that it's permanent.
Cruel destiny, if you will.
Amid all that, Keith's wife is increasingly fearful of what's becoming of him. Now, I watch Keith and the kind of person he is, even before he gains contact with Zontar, and how we're supposed to believe that he's a social reject, and like all other characters, as superficial as that feels, I have to say to the filmmakers,
under that setup and those circumstances, Don't give the guy a supermodel wife.
Anyway, her name is Martha, and to the actress Pat Delaney's credit, she does put heart into her performance more so than others in the cast, hammy as it does become. Anyway, more people get stung by injectopods, including Kurt's wife Anne, who unleashes an electropod at him, leading to one of the better action scenes under a low bar, followed by what might be the most convincing moment of pathos in the entire movie.
Again, with the assumption that the injectopod bite can only mean that she's automatically too far gone.
Also too far gone are the satellite research team, except for Louise, who they all kill, and Kurt has to kill all of them in turn. Martha's hammy anger puts her over the edge to the point where she takes a gun to Zontar's lair, and it's shortly after her departure that Keith comes to realize Zontar's intention for the entire human race is indeed at the highest level of hostility, and that he must destroy him, but too bad Martha left before he could say that guns can't kill him. And somehow, even before his realization of Zontar's imminent danger, Keith had already constructed the one weapon that can.
You just have to remember that movies like this are supposed to entertain you with this nonsense type thing.
Ultimately, Keith makes that expected necessary sacrifice as he uses that very weapon on Zontar, and we're reminded that everyone but Kurt died because of Zontar, forcing you to comprehend that this is a tragedy, but not getting any message as to what purpose the tragedy serves.
So bad it's good, maybe with the right watch party with you, but one bewildering thing, uh, John Agar, I kind of have a soft spot for him.
Now, on my channel, I've repeatedly mentioned how I'm a big John Wayne fan, and any other fellow fan, while they might not recognize the name John Agar, would readily recognize his face. He co-starred with Duke early in his film career with High Billing in Fort Apache. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and Sands of Iwo Jima. So how did he end up here? Turns out his career went downhill in the early 50s amid his alcoholism, 3 DUIs, and the resulting divorce from America's sweetheart herself, Shirley Temple. To his credit, he did manage to salvage his acting career, getting lead B movie roles, largely in movies that follow the lines of, big surprise here, monster movies. Perhaps most notably in the sequel to The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Revenge of the Creature, and Tarantula. Interestingly, in both cases, he got top billing
Well
over
fed?
Yeah,
Clint
something
Eastwood.
like that.
Well, maybe so, Doc, but there were 4 rats in there when I changed my lights.
Fire 2 rockets on this first pass.
Of course, early in his career.
Apparently, he never completely lost touch with John Wayne because he managed to get parts in 3 more of his films: The Undefeated, albeit blink and you'll miss him; Chisholm as a family man moving out of town; and Big Jake, the first guy to get shot in the opening scene. But I have to believe that this was the lowest point of his acting career. If IMDb is to be believed, it had a budget of only $22,000, chicken feed even for the 60s. Unclear how he got pulled into this, maybe a 3-month period of no offer from studios. But Tony Houston, Susan Bierman, Pat Delaney, Neil Fletcher, all bit players at best throughout their careers.
Once again, thanks to free streaming platforms, it's readily available for your viewing and educational pleasure. And here, talking about storytelling, some inspiring, readily available in public domain. Of course, in this case, Gorgo, it's only the comics published by Charlton Comics, which no publisher purchased the copyright of when Charlton closed its doors. And these were based on the 1961 movie, which, while is widely available in several YouTube downloads, it's not public domain. So my unqualified legal knowledge, as far as I can tell, the most you can legally do is reprint and sell your own copies of the Charlton comics, since King's Brothers Productions still owns the character. The comics initially followed the movie's plot closely, so I'm taking the simple route and following the plot through the movie.
Now, Gorgo is often thought of as the British Godzilla, So the only two factors to hang that idea onto is the movie's setting in London, some of it in non-British Ireland, and the cast and probably the crew being largely British. The movie was helmed by Russian-born French director Eugene Laurier. The producers settled on London after considerations for somewhere in Japan and also Paris. And the Kings Brothers production company is based in the United States. The two leads, Bill Travers and William Sylvester, play Joe Ryan and Sam Slade, respectively, two English sailors who deal with the torrents created by a volcano from which emerges Gorgo. After getting a good look at Godzilla, he looks pretty underwhelming size-wise, and a common problem among kaiju films we see as the movie plays out, it's pretty inconsistent in size.
And the size issue will even become more interesting in time.
It doesn't take long to see the movie's parallel plot to all iterations of the most often used King Kong plot, first used in 1933 and put into remakes in 1976 and 2005. All three of them have a greedy cutthroat profiteer taking a crew on a massive ship to Skull Island and see King Kong as a star attraction to exploit and feature in a paying audience, only for chaos to erupt as Kong breaks free and goes berserk through Manhattan, leaving a body count in his wake before he is finally toppled off a skyscraper to his death. In the cases of the 1933 and 2005 versions, the greedy opportunist is Carl Denham, a movie producer played by Robert Armstrong, then Jack Black. In the 1976 version, it's oil tycoon Fred Wilson, played by Charles Grodin, who sees exploiting Kong in the same showbiz fashion as the answer to an otherwise money pit effort to collect from an oil deposit that turned out to be worthless because it needed another 100,000 years to age to become refinable. All these guys are despicable, yet they have charm to them.
On the other hand, these two, they're despicable, and that's about it.
Here, Ryan and Slade immediately see the same golden goose in Gorgo. They do capture him in their net and take him to London to parade through the streets on a semi-trailer and exhibit him in a sunken enclosure ultimately. He too breaks out, and from there clobbers the wrangling crew before Gorgo is recaptured and put back into his enclosure. Now, a good time to bring up another character parallel with King Kong, Voices of Reason. In both the 1933 and 2005 versions, they are Jack Driscoll and Ann Darrow, played first by Bruce Cabot and Fay Wray, and then Adrian Brody and Naomi Watts. Then the 1976 version, it's Jack Prescott, played by Jeff Bridges, and Dwan, no last name given, played by Jessica Lange. In each case, they speak out against the ethics of the opportunists intent on capitalizing on King Kong as a high-revenue spectacle. Such is the case here, first with little boy Sean, who as a stowaway on their ship tries to free Gorgo from the net holding him, with reasons.
Maybe to save their silly skins for you.
Also, there are scientists who show up regularly with continued warnings that they are playing with fire. They are boring, until we can get an intriguing revelation that Gorgo is an infant version of his species. And yes, Gorgo's mother emerges with a vengeance, destroying a large ship in the process and on her way to London. So here we go from baby Gorgo being exploited exhibit parallel of King Kong to Mama Gorgo being a rampaging monster parallel to King Kong, leaving a huge body count in her wake for reasons you can't argue with to rescue her baby. I will say that the successful rescue followed by the return trip home of mother and son is pretty heartwarming, so I'll say that this is the best part of it. I do have issues with this movie in general. Now, this came out 7 years after the first Godzilla movie. This kind of feels like a downgrade in kaiju costume quality. As is often the case, there seem to be multiple forms of Gorgo used on the screen. What we mostly see is the head predominantly looking like it's not even engineered to move at the neck, and the obvious unnatural folding in the skin showing up on a regular basis. And okay, it was nominated for Oscar for the best special effects, but this was at a time when not many studios were trying that hard to compete in that department. It wasn't until George Lucas' Industrial Light and Magic came around that there was any such thing as a special effects company, so that bar isn't high at all there. Now, between this movie and the referenced King Kong movies, only one of the three greedy opportunists gets his comeuppance, and that's Fred Wilson in the 1976 version. Both versions of Carl Denham have no indication of being held responsible for the damages and casualties brought about due to their recklessness. Ryan and Slade is the same story, only Ryan in particular always seems completely lacking in any social responsibility and pushes back hard when Slade starts showing remorse. Couple that with the main voices of reason being mostly uninteresting, severely hindering my enjoyment. What's even weirder is, while I think it's okay to use military stock footage, these guys, they actually dub in their own dialogue on the stock footage.
West 25. Still tracking West 25. Back to task force. Search 20 degrees west.
But overall, the story, I do enjoy that, and the use of reptilian kaiju. I enjoyed that factor of it, even if it is relatively primitive, even for those days. But I enjoy enough to call this movie marginally entertaining. But again, there are currently several downloads of it on YouTube, and again, I have no idea where this fares legally, but readily available for your viewing and educational pleasure. And the comics are public domain if you can get your hands on one. And let's, in storytelling, talk about readily available public domain movies in the genre of kaiju. And this one's a slight bit more qualified size-wise, according to what we normally think of as kaiju. So the year is 1955, in which a better time awaited you in watching Alfred Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief. We're in the thick of the 50s, inspired by the advent of jet-powered fighter planes, the space race, and a mysterious nuclear age where radiation becomes the basis for creating multitudes of monsters. And it came in the form of sci-fi B movies that were getting spat out left and right. Several have been considered classics, but usually they came under a low budget and a little heart. Such is the case with The Phantom from 10,000 Leagues, directed by Dan Milner, who had a nice, steady career of movies, just nothing found in the common pantheon of classics. And yeah, we're talking about a team of brothers working together on the project, and sometimes that's a good indicator of a devoted indie project, but here it's talking about everybody working in on the cheap rather than on the ambitious. But it all starts with a fisherman and a rowboat. In the depths, we see a mysterious light beam and the Phantom coming upward. He pulls the fisherman down. In spite of having really sharp, mean-looking teeth, there's no biting. Likely somewhere between due to content restrictions and practicality, but the fisherman ends up on the beach dead, his boat next to him, and we have to be told that there are radiation burns on his skin. Amid all that, biologist Dr. Ted Stevens, alias Ted Baxter, and federal agent William Grant show up separately to look into the matter. All the while, we see afar off a would-be spear gun sniper named George Thomas with unknown ulterior motives. Also, marine biologist, Professor King, never a first name given, looks shifty to the two men seeking answers concerning the dead fisherman. We are introduced to his daughter Lois, which is the beginning of the expected romantic subplot between her and Ted, and his secretary Ethel shows her suspicions as he keeps operating in secretive fashion. And we do get to know how the secretly dastardly Professor King accomplished this character creation, with your basic pet turtle and a smaller version of the light being seen earlier in the ocean. In case you're wondering, the answer is yes. The big threat in this movie is the result of a cliche, misguided scientist. Of course, you're left wondering what the whole point of Dr. Stevens' cover as Ted Baxter served, as quickly as everyone picks up on it. After the gig is up, Dr. Stevens presses Professor King again, pointing out a beam of light coming from the ocean floor and the sea monster inhabiting the ocean floor around it. Professor King is naturally on the defensive. The plot thickens a little as George approaches a woman who has mysterious dealings, demanding that no diving should occur from the investigating men and that he find all the big scientific data. Apparently, We need a reminder of how dangerous the sea creature is as a couple get into the boat. Yeah, the same boat. Go scuba diving and re-emerge, only to have the boat be capsized by you-know-what. Ted's investigation of the bodies is interrupted by George and an attempt to kill Ted with his spear gun. He gets the benefit of plot armor as the spear misses him, but George escapes and the spear becomes evidence between him and Grant. The two in turn get in the boat to do an investigative dive. They get the needed exposure to the sea creature and the light ray to further plot and also drag it. George meets again with Wanda, who warns that the people she works for are getting impatient. Ethel's probing gets her on the hot seat, ultimately leading to her demise by George's spear gun. In come Grant and the local police into Professor King's quarters about Ethel's death and the suspicion due to the spear guns on display. Then a final sit-down with Professor King and Ted leads to a forced development to put the professor's back against the wall, where he admits that the death ray and sea monster are his doing, but a hammy ethical dilemma ensues. After the light ray, out of nowhere, destroys an ocean liner, the professor makes that big decision that starts with a tantrum at the laboratory. George is apprehended out of nowhere, and you're left to realize that the subplot with him and Wanda went nowhere. The professor makes the fateful decision to go on a dive, dynamite in hand.
And bring on the forced moral of the story.
If I'd only known in time, perhaps I could have stopped him. I know he meant this power to be used to help humanity, not destroy it.
I'm sure he did. And he paid for his mistake.
Now, nobody watches a 50s B-movie expecting a lineup of Oscar-worthy performances, but here I saw the worst acting I have seen in recent memory. Everyone phones it in, and it looks like everybody gives their lines and waits for the cue for their next line.
How did you activate it?
That, Dr. Stevens, is my knowledge and mine alone.
Now look, you can't go swimming.
I don't like being told what to do.
Now, So Bad It's Good, a watch party can make it work, something to laugh at together. At the same bad acting I mentioned, along with the weird aspects like everybody using the same rowboat, just know that it will drag at certain points. And dipping into the world of public domain, talking about public domain kaiju, under the strict definition of strange beast, not necessarily big beast. Anyway, track of the Moon Beast, released by Lizard Productions, which apparently went no further than this movie because every lead I could find to read up on them showed only this, and with that kind of name, did they have any other genre in mind? And yeah, this is a reptilian monster. How do we know?
Some form of reptile closely related to the Tyrannosaurus rex.
Directed by first and only time director and otherwise second unit director Richard Ashe, the story starts with our meeting mineralogist Paul Carlson, his friend, mentor, and our needed expert on Native American culture, Professor Johnny Longbow Salinas, and just arrived love interest, Kathy Nolan. A meteor shower has been forecasted, and Paul sees that applicable to his field of study and makes it an occasion to make it a date with Kathy, when all of a sudden a dislodged fragment of a moon rock strikes Paul in the head. And because that fragment needs to be consequential, Paul is too stubborn to get immediate medical treatment. Kathy sees Paul home, where we get to meet his pet, Komodo dragon named Tai.
Short for Tyrannosaurus.
Now, an adult Komodo dragon, they typically grow to be 8 feet long and would need to be contained in a cage that would fill half an average living room. Couple that with the tremendous task an on-set lizard wrangler would deal with due to the Komodo dragon's deadly infectious bite. I have to believe that this is a smaller species of monitor lizard or an Australian goanna.
Then we get the frequently used time padding device of a random open-air concert. Strange and deadly happenings come out of nowhere where people are getting killed by a supernatural reptilian being. And Johnny Longbow starts picking up on how the creature's emergence parallels ancient events depicted in ancient Native American art. Paul finally sees a doctor and we get the needed insight.
What does it mean? What's happened to me?
You've been hit by a small particle of matter of some kind. Not enough to cause any pain because of the high speed, but it is there.
And before long he realizes that he's been running amok as the Moon Beast whenever there's a full moon.
It's like in those werewolf tales, when there's a full moon in Transylvania. Johnny.
So yeah, basically this is a reptilian creature under werewolf lore, and what's weird is that these full moon happenings feel like they're happening every couple of days, if not a whole week. And okay, that helps with pacing, but it really pushes your suspension of disbelief to its boundaries, knowing that a full moon lasts no longer than 3 days. What feels like additional time padding is the alerted high-level experts in related fields come and just add sciencey terminology to what Johnny has already figured out. And after getting restrained at the hospital, we get... And Paul further comes to realize what has become of him, and understandably gets weighed down with guilt. And goes out with suicidal intentions that carry their own fantasy. Johnny figures out what has to be done to end the threat. He heads out, dreading the prospect of killing his dear friend. Kathy can't bear the thought of losing her boyfriend of just a few days and goes out in hopes to find a less lethal solution. The Moon Beast continues its rampage, killing 2 cops with low-budget swats. And just as we get our first clear look at the Moon Beast, it turns out to be our last, because Johnny gets his clear shot to use his method figured out as the only way to end the Moon Beast threat.
Now, this movie's production was completed in 1972, but was released in 1976, so it was in the can long before Jaws came out. And as you watch this, knowing that, part of you wants to believe it was ahead of Jaws, with that idea of minimizing how much of the monster can be seen at the beginning before we finally see it completely. But what little we see of the Moon Beast leads you to believe that they were completely ashamed of its design, and I mean, I've seen worse, so I don't think they should have hit it like this. And one thing that flew me for a loop was to see the writing credits on IMDb and Wikipedia, because these are the hardest ever to read on-screen credits. But William Finger is mostly known among comic book fans as Bill Finger, who nowadays is largely getting recognized as the key figure in the creation of Batman. Now, Bob Kane, he originated the idea but needed Bill to flesh out what we know made him compelling. And you don't have to look far to find better sources for that than me. Just Google him or enter the name Bill Finger on YouTube for the whole story. But this revelation led me to realize that he has had his share of screenwriting credits before his death in 1974. But I can't help but have curiosity over Bill's draft of the screenplay, believing that it had a better story than this, and probably didn't have the budget for his vision to be realized. And once again, thanks to free streaming platforms, it's readily available for a viewing and educational player as it's in public domain. So, Roger Corman and Kaiju, a match made in heaven? Welcome to my channel, KC, that's me, Carrie Chuck the Sledge Storyteller, here to talk about the wonderful world of storytelling and talking about the storytelling found in public domain movies, and specifically Kaiju. Now, Night of the Blood Beast, it's a strange beast, so I believe that fits the criteria, according to the Japanese word. And it's a rarity among Roger Corman movies because he's managed to do well in keeping his movies copyrighted, but somehow he let this one lapse into the public domain.
And one puzzling factor here is the title, Night of the Blood Beast. I mean, what do you think of when you hear Blood Beast? A monstrous bloodsucker, right? And the movie poster wanted you to think that way as well. But this monster will just kill one person, and there's no indication of massive blood loss at any time. But come to find out, the working title was Creature from Galaxy 27, in line with 50 sci-fi, and more palatable with the story. Between the actual title and the misleading movie poster, I have to believe some moviegoers were pretty miffed once they realized how bloodless it was. Directed by Bernard Kowalski, whose directing career has been dominated by TV episodes, the story begins with astronaut Major John Corcoran in an animated spacecraft, suddenly in peril from an unknown cause. He crashes on Earth, and the Earthbound crew show up at the wreckage and confirm the worst.
He bought it all the way.
You're certain? No respiration, no heartbeat, no pulse. Came down pretty hard.
Naturally, it has a hard emotional impact on Corcoran's fiancée, Dr. Julie Benson, and surrounding her are two of the greatest candidates for Mr. Sensitivity.
I can understand how you feel, but we can't let it interfere with the work we have to do.
Let's get going.
Surveying the wreckage leaves crew members Dave Randall and Donna Bixby baffled over a strange gash along the side and a strange muddy substance as well.
Yeah.
And emerging from that after everyone leaves is animated moss. Preliminary examination by Dr. Alex Wyman of Corcoran's body shows him lacking in rigor mortis far past the time when it should have set in. Corcoran's body is brought to their facility, where everyone's further puzzled when his vitals turn up a blood pressure reading. And why you would even try that on a corpse tells you to remember that this is a shoestring budgeted movie that was shot over a 1 week period, if Wikipedia is to be believed. Suddenly, a big disturbance erupts and something breaks out, leaving Randall injured. Amid mysteries of Corcoran's body showing signs of life, a blood sample is taken and we get a second helping of cheap animation to show that something is taking over Corcoran's blood cells.
Now, you have me in this situation among this group. I'm taking every precaution necessary to avoid any kind of catastrophe, like what we're kind of going to get.
But they leave Corcoran simply lying on an operating table to check on regularly, and while Julie is still mourning amid an apparent resurrection, Dr. Wyman speaks of the scientific breakthroughs that he sees coming about. Later in the observation room of the facility, Dr. Wyman is killed, and suddenly Donna discovers... So yes, Corcoran's alive. No one immediately thinks of any potential problems that may be coming about with that, but we're already hearing talk of alien kaiju having benevolent intentions. And then we find out that Corcoran had become a human incubator to the Blood Beast's offspring. Enter the Blood Beast, and everyone but Corcoran wants it dead. The Blood Beast escapes amid a hail of bullets and fire, and we afterward have to hear more passive reasoning.
Don't understand. It didn't come in malice. It could have killed all of you earlier, but it was me it was after. It had to come back to me, too.
So we've got Randall and other crew member Steve Dunlap looking bloodthirsty as they remain determined to kill the Blood Beast, especially when it grabs Donna.
But strong reasoning has us second-guessing.
This isn't a battle between men and a non-reasoning being. Can't you see it doesn't want to kill for the sake of killing? It could have done away with all of us earlier if it wanted to.
Corcoran gets everyone to voice their agreement to give the Blood Beast a chance, but Randall and Dunlap secretly arm themselves to the teeth in anticipation of destroying it by any means necessary. We have that planned encounter after mere minutes of continued pleas from Corcoran to hear the Blood Beast out. We suddenly hear speaking with dead Dr. Wyman's voice.
Now I am able to speak by assimilation of former processes.
With a promise that his race, growing inside Corcoran, will bring a better way of life to Earth.
So yeah, maybe too soon after reviewing Zontar.
Suddenly, we're forced to switch mental gears that the commandos of the crew were right all along, and now Corcoran has to agree that the Blood Beast is hostile and begs everyone to kill him so that the baby Blood Beasts don't emerge to oppress the human race. He ends up killing himself, and his friends manage to burn the Blood Beast alive. The end.
Now, this story was conceived by Gene Corman, and the screenplay duty was given to first-time and only-time screenwriter Martin Varno. And you look at his filmography, his forte in Hollywood was makeup and sound effects. And I have to believe that the screenplay assignment was just dropped in his lap. And again, Wikipedia, apparently he needed help from his friends and fellow screenwriters, uncredited, Jerome Bixby and Harold Jacob Smith, to write the dialogue. And yeah, that's easily the strongest part of the story here. But surely you have to pick up on how this is poorly written copycat of so many sci-fi and monster movies. The alien takeover of a spaceship, the alien possession, the deceptive promise by an alien of an elevated society. Now, all this plus one common factor between It, Plan 9 from Outer Space, Tarantula, and several other so bad they're good movies that helps keep them watchable. They're short and they don't wear out their welcome. In the case of Night of the Blood Beast, it's only an hour and 2 minutes. But yes, it's worth a watch, ideally with a group in the spirit of Mystery Science Theater 3000. But again, thanks to free streaming platforms, it's readily available for your viewing and educational pleasure as it's in public domain. But that's my take on the public domain movie and Kaiju, Night of the Blood Beast. Now, the term Kaiju became popular with Godzilla and other giant monsters of Japanese design, and it's soon applied to all giant monsters coming from all cultures, present and past. But let me emphasize that I limited Kaiju in my chosen category to depictions of such against human beings or Kaiju versus Kaiju. And with that frame of mind, I'm dipping into qualifying movie monsters of the silent era, and since these all predate 1929, they're all in public domain. But let's start with the filmmaker who, as I've covered in previous video, seems to have made the first of everything. George Méliès.
So in Conquest of the Pole, you've got a group effort building toward putting things toward getting out for an expedition to the North Pole. A lot of antics occur in the process, including a part that doesn't age well at all, where women representing the suffrage movement are lampooned as they are pushed back from being involved in the journey. After a big showcase of proposed vehicles, they launch amid a strange display of all kinds of aircraft before running into a qualifying but not significant kaiju in the giant flying scorpion. But then, after we see the explorers arrive, they encounter the star kaiju of the movie, a snow giant. The whole concept of a giant monster was a new and experimental one, so I guess the whole idea of this giant smoking a pipe as it emerges can be forgiven. It's mean enough to grab hold of men and swallow one, only to be fired upon enough to be forced to throw him up. Ultimately, man-made firepower prevails, but I have to give Méliès credit. He manages to make the giant show a wide range of arm, head, and mouth movement to effectively give it an illustration of life and also of menace. So 2 years later, we get The Primitive Man, a movie about warring factions of cavemen, directed by D.W. Griffith. I've always been hesitant about grouping dinosaurs under kaiju. They kind of have their own thing. But these two dinosaurs are generic enough not to be categorized under any well-known dinosaur species, so the look and feel is right. Now, going to school, I remember the enjoyment I had in both English and German class reading the adventures of Siegfried, or it's also known as Sigurd. But Die Nibelungen, that part of the title refers to the society of dwarves in the story. In this case, it's the movie, Die Nibelungen Siegfried. The core story is about Siegfried climbing the royalty ladder, laced with his war stories, the first of which is his battle against the dragon, never named in the movie, but in German folklore, this dragon's name is Fafnir. The scene here leaves you either using your imagination to fill some gaps, believing that the dragon had a hoard of gold previously stolen from the kingdom, or had previously killed several peasants. Otherwise, you're left believing that Siegfried is a cruel murderer on a dragon who barely seems like any kind of threat at all on screen, only with its fiery breath being that kind of threat. But in fairness, It would be another year before giant monsters would be depicted in a convincingly threatening fashion against people. But before we go there, we'll stick around in 1924 for one more movie, that being The Thief of Baghdad. It's worth mentioning that watching any movie depiction of The Thief of Baghdad gives you vibes of Disney's Aladdin. And the makers of that film openly admit to drawing inspiration from this movie as well from the Aladdin story. You've got that same depiction, in this case, of a young man, Ahmed, played by the premier action star of his day, Douglas Fairbanks. At the beginning of the movie, he's living on the street, but he makes that bold decision of taking on the guise of royalty to win the heart of a princess. He, along with other competing suitors, have to leave the city in search of the rarest treasured relic they can get. Ahmed's chosen journey leads to encounters with this movie's kaijus. First, a dragon, no doubt a small crocodilian with dragon prosthesis. Then a giant bat. And a giant sea spider. But for its time, these are mightily impressive creature depictions where you get the full feel of their menace as well as their fiery threat. Finally, Lost World, and moving 1 year as promised. The dinosaurs depicted here have their kaiju moments. Based on the novel written by Sherlock Holmes creator Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was around to see this movie and loved it. And I almost feel like I just have to bring this into the video just because it has a huge movie effects milestone. Willis O'Brien's work here was his own little hobby of stop motion animation, where he perfected that craft to make it work here. Obviously, this is why he got picked up for this. And nowadays, while we easily pick up on the unnatural jerkiness of the motion here shown with these dinosaurs, it had the same effect on its audience as did Jurassic Park in 1993 with CGI and close-up animatronics. It's got some good dinosaur versus dinosaur moments, and a breakout by the Brontosaurus into the streets of London that O'Brien would repeat as he ran King Kong through the streets of New York in the same fashion.
Now, I've been wanting to answer the call to cover public domain kaiju, which has been slim pickings given how relatively new the genre is, and Pulgasari is uniquely positioned with reasoning to believe that it would be public domain. I've searched as best I could to find an official statement of public domain, but intuitively thinking that a refusal to protect any copyrights registered by the North Korean government as part of the sanctions that have been made against them, since they did nationalize their film industry, and I haven't found anything definitive. The media library known as Internet Archive made the kind of statement along those lines, but it states, while never officially released in most parts of the world, countries like the US treat the movie as public domain out of spite for North Korea. And that would be what you would expect from other countries to a country that doesn't allow its citizens to reserve basic human rights. So the movie begins in feudal Korea towards the end of what is called the Goryeo dynasty. I hope I pronounced that right. Somewhere between 918 and 1392 CE. The king oppresses the land, making life miserable for the peasants. There's a blacksmith in the land named Taxi, who is imprisoned for standing up for his people. Now, knowing that he's soon to die, he takes a handful of rice and molds a tiny figurine of a monster and prays to the gods to make his creation come to life as a creature who will fight for his people. Laxi's daughter Ame receives the figurine, accidentally cuts her arm, and her blood falls on the figurine, and thus is born metal-eating Pulgasari, so named for a chimera-like creature of Korean folklore. Ame's discovery of him is immediately followed by the king's army bringing the rebellion leader Inde, also Ame's fiancé, into town to be made an example of. And in typical movie execution timing, in comes Pulgasari ex machina. And more of the king's soldiers try to attack him, foolishly with swords made of his key staple. So Pulgasari immediately becomes part of the village, and they tolerate him as he does be the occasional brat as he begins to grow. In time, we watch the rebellion prosper as Pulgasari keeps growing until he reaches giant status. With his support, they attack the palace of the regional governor and kill him. The evil king becomes aware of the rebellion's progress and resolves to crush it, but he realizes how much of a threat Pulgasari is. So what can the king do to win? The evil king becomes aware of the rebellion's progress and resolves to crush it, but he realizes how much of a threat Pulgasari is. So what can a king do to win but to take Ame hostage? Not willing to allow her to die, Pulgasari walks into a cage as mandated, and the evil king soldiers torch it. But for all those hot, intense flames, I mean really hot, intense flames, engulfing that cage, in the aftermath we find Pulgasari standing firm and unscathed. Well, the king needs to think up another solution while his army has to continue battling the rebellion, doing so by catapulting firebombs. Enter again Pulgasari, who takes multiple rocket-propelled spears without a problem, until he takes one to the eye, but while there's blood, Pulgasari presses on. So in comes the priestess, who calls upon the gods to collapse the surrounding canyon upon him, burying him completely. After escaping, Ame resurrects Pulgasari again by pouring some of her blood where he's buried. Pulgasari once again emerges, attacks the king's palace, destroys it, and finally kills the king. But amid all that victory, Pulgasari becomes his own problem. He quickly gorges down on all the king's metal weaponry, but remains unsatiated. So the people give him all their metal crockery, and then realize that he'll always need more metal. Ame realizes that a sacrifice must be made, and so she hides inside a big bell that Pulgasari finds and immediately eats. Pulgasari yells in anguish as Ame's presence in his stomach causes him to turn to stone and crumble into pieces, but suddenly, baby Pulgasari re-emerges from the rubble. He becomes a mass of light, merges himself with Ame's body, and nothing changes from there. But we know now that the people are safe from any more threats.
From a quality standpoint, I think the Pulgasari costume is well made, and the special effects are decent, but the acting is no good, and the plot, it doesn't carry much strength-wise. Really, there's only one underlying factor that makes the movie worthwhile.
Now, there can be no talking about this movie without also talking about its background. In the year 1984, North Korea is under the leadership of dictator Kim Il-sung, with son and future dictator Kim Jong-il in charge of propaganda filming. And anything involving any kind of movie making is a dream job for Kim Jong-il, because movies are his biggest passion. Factor also in that this is the year of Japan's Godzilla 1984, which will be reworked as Godzilla 1985 in the United States, and is the return of Godzilla from his 9-year furlough from the movies. Jong-il suddenly wants a bite at the Kaiju apple, so he assigns that to his hand-picked South Korean director, Shin Sang-ok. Of course, hand-picked might give you the wrong idea, because Sang-ok and his then ex-wife, actress Choi Yoon-hee, had actually been kidnapped by Jong-il in 1977, because unsurprisingly, in its isolation from everyone else, North Korea had taken a backseat in the filmmaking industry, and Sang-ok started making movies for him as propaganda, several before Pulgasari. But Jong-il doesn't stop at an upgrade at director. He actually grabbed some talent from Toho Studios, who gave us Godzilla. Kenpachiro Satsuma, he had been wearing the Godzilla suit from Godzilla vs. Hedorah in 1971 until Godzilla vs. Destroyer in 1995 gets to wear the fully grown Pulgasari suit, while Masao Fukazawa, professionally known as Little Man Machan, who wore the costume of Minya, Godzilla's son, in several films, he gets to wear the baby Pulgasari costume. Finally, they also nab Teruyoshi Nakano, who had been working on special effects for several Godzilla movies. So how do these guys end up working for Pulgasari? They are tricked into believing that they would be doing film work in China, and didn't realize until after landing that they were in North Korea. This whole story of kidnapping and trickery is told in a book, A Kim Jong-il Production by Paul Fisher. Check it out, you'll get something far more elaborate than what I just gave you. I just gave you the clip notes. But the real hot button factor is the political subtext for the movie. There have been multiple interpretations with different ideas of what part of the movie parallels capitalism and what part parallels communism. But then I learned of the Kim family's actual political policy of Juche, which they formulated as they divorced themselves from Russia and China. I've read just a couple of sources on this subject, but what I've picked up from reading those sources is that it's rooted in self-reliance and even self-sacrifice if necessary. But it seems that it's the Juche angle that makes the most sense, since there's a big sacrifice at the end. But don't hinge your conclusion on mine. I'm as amateur as you can get in political science. But I've put links in the description to some basic articles on Juche if you're at all curious. You'll get a better understanding than my summary. But that's my take on Pulgasari. Thank you for watching. Agree, disagree, something I left out? Please let me know in the comment section. I'll always say it. Let's all look for civility amid all the bad news out there about social and political strife. Let's not hate. Let's find friends wherever we can go. Everyone be safe, and God bless.